The golden morning light spilled into the kitchen, stretching long shadows over the cool marble countertops. The air carried the comforting scent of freshly brewed coffee, mingling with the faint aroma of toasted bread. It was the kind of peaceful morning that made you believe everything was just as it should be. The soft ticking of the clock filled the quiet space, steady and unbothered, completely unaware that everything was about to change. I sat at the head of the table, my fingers curled loosely around a warm coffee mug. My expression remained neutral, calm even, though my mind worked through the weight of the moment. Across from me, my wife of 10 years, Emily, stirred her tea with slow, deliberate movements. Her manicured nails made soft clicking sounds against the porcelain cup, her entire demeanor unervingly composed. Too composed. Like she had rehearsed this moment over and over again in her mind, waiting for the perfect timing. Then, without hesitation, she spoke. "I'm leaving you, James." Her voice was steady, almost casual, as if she was discussing the weather. She placed her spoon down carefully and brought the cup to her lips, taking a sip as though what she had just said carried no real weight. It was a performance, polished and calculated. I took a slow sip of my own coffee, letting the warmth spread through my chest, my eyes locked on hers. She was waiting for something, a reaction, an explosion of anger, a moment of weakness. Maybe even desperate pleading. She got nothing. For the first time, her confidence faltered. A brief flicker of confusion crossed her face before she smoothed it over. "I've been thinking about this for a long time," she continued, setting her cup down with precision. Folding her hands neatly, she met my gaze. "I don't love you anymore, James. I haven't for years." I tilted my head slightly, considering her words. I didn't move, didn't shift, didn't blink. I just watched her. She swallowed hard before continuing. "I wanted to tell you sooner, but I figured it would be best to wait until I had everything in order. I don't want to fight. I don't want drama. Let's be adults about this. I'll pack my things and be gone by the end of the week." Her voice was smooth, carefully measured, but I heard it, the slight tremor beneath her words, the tiniest crack in her perfect performance. I set my coffee down gently, the soft clink against the table echoing in the heavy silence. Then, slowly, deliberately, I smiled. That was not the reaction she had expected. For the first time, her confidence wavered. Her fingers tensed slightly where they rested on the table, and her lips parted as if she wanted to say something else, but nothing came. The silence stretched between us. Finally, I spoke. "All right." Emily blinked, clearly thrown off. "All right," she echoed, as if she had misheard me. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. She had envisioned something else entirely, a fight, an argument, a dramatic confrontation. Something to fuel her self-righteous exit. But instead, I sat there, smiling at her, as if she had just told me something mildly amusing rather than life-altering. Her brows knitted together. "Did you hear what I just said?" I nodded. "I did." Her expression hardened. "I'm leaving you. I have someone else. I've thought about this for a long time. I don't love you anymore." I leaned back in my chair, my posture too relaxed, too at ease. Emily shifted in her seat. She was expecting chaos, not this eerie calm. "Look," she said, her tone sharpening, "I don't want to drag this out. I think it's best if we move on like civilized adults. There's no need to make this harder than it has to be." I exhaled a quiet chuckle, shaking my head slightly. "Difficult," I echoed. My fingers drummed lightly against the table before I finally stood, stretching as if this conversation was nothing more than a minor inconvenience. "No, Emily. You misunderstand me." Our eyes met, and for the first time, something in my gaze shifted. A slow, creeping unease flickered across her face, just for a second. A strange sinking feeling settled in her stomach. Before she could ask what I meant, the doorbell rang. The sharp, piercing sound cut through the tension like a blade. Emily stiffened. My smile widened. "Ah," I murmured, my voice carrying an edge she couldn't quite place. "Right on time." Her head snapped toward the hallway, her pulse quickening just slightly. "Who?" she started, but the words got caught in her throat. I didn't answer. I simply strolled toward the door, my movements slow, deliberate. I wasn't surprised. I was prepared. And she knew it. She sat frozen as I disappeared around the corner, leaving her alone with the echo of the doorbell still hanging in the air. A cold chill crept up her spine. Something was wrong. Something was very, very wrong. She hesitated, her fingers tightening around the edge of the table, but then she scoffed at herself. "Pull yourself together, Emily." This was just another game, another pathetic, last-ditch attempt to rattle her. Straightening her shoulders, she pushed back her chair and strode toward the door. But with each step, an inexplicable sense of dread coiled around her ribs, tightening, suffocating. It made no sense. It was just a door. Just a visitor. And yet, the way I was watching her, the way I was enjoying this, made her nerves go haywire. She reached for the handle, her fingers trembling slightly as she pulled the door open. And then she froze. The crisp morning air rushed in, golden sunlight spilling across the doorstep, but the sight in front of her sent a cold shock through her veins. Standing on the porch was a group of people she never expected to see together. Her parents. Her sister, Jessica. Her brother, Ryan. And behind them, 3 men. Men she knew. Men she shouldn't have known together. Her heart slammed against her ribs. For a moment, the world blurred at the edges, her brain scrambling to make sense of what she was seeing. Jessica frowned. "Emily, what's going on?" Ryan crossed his arms, his military-cut hair barely ruffled by the breeze, his sharp eyes scanning her face. "Yeah, Emily. Mind telling us why the hell we're all here?" Emily opened her mouth, but no words came out. The 3 men behind them shifted uncomfortably, their faces a mix of confusion and something else, something close to dread. Her breath caught in her throat. Alex. Brandon. Tom. 3 different parts of her life. 3 different secrets. And now, all of them standing here together on her front porch. Behind her, I finally stood up from the table. My presence was calm, steady, as I leaned casually against the doorway. "Well, sweetheart," I murmured, my voice dripping with amusement. "Don't just stand there. Invite them in." Slowly, she turned back to me, her eyes wide, panic clawing at the edges of her composure. I smiled. She knew. Somehow, impossibly, I knew everything. She swallowed hard, her throat suddenly dry. Her father's deep voice cut through the air, firm and unwavering. "Emily, why don't you tell us why we were all asked to come here this morning?" The trap had been set. The pieces arranged. And Emily, for the first time in her life, realized she had completely lost control. Emily sat frozen at the head of the dining table, her fingers clenched so tightly around her fork that her knuckles turned white. The breakfast she had so carefully prepared just an hour ago sat untouched in front of her. The steam had long since disappeared from her coffee. The scent of fresh toast and eggs, once comforting, now felt sickeningly heavy in the air. I, on the other hand, was completely at ease. Leaning back in my chair, I stretched my arms before clasping my hands together in front of me. I wasn't in a rush. I wanted to savor this moment, the slow, creeping realization settling over each and every person in the room. "Shall we begin?" I asked, my voice light, almost amused. Silence. The room was tense, confusion thick in the air. Emily's father, Richard, sat stiff-backed, his thick brows knitted together as he glanced between his daughter and me. Her mother, Elaine, perched at the edge of her chair, gripping the pearl necklace around her throat like a lifeline. Jessica, Emily's younger sister, had her arms crossed, her face twisted in irritation, like she was already regretting coming here. And Ryan, her older brother, leaned against the wall, his military-trained posture making it clear that he was already preparing for a fight. Then there were the others. 3 men sat awkwardly around the table. Brandon, Alex, Tom. Each of them with their own secrets. Each of them thinking they were here for something else. They had walked into this house expecting a conversation, a discussion, maybe even a chance to gloat. But now they were realizing that they had stepped into something else entirely. I let the silence stretch for a moment longer before I finally spoke again. "I'm sure you're all wondering why you're here." No one answered. Emily's breathing had grown shallower, her fingers gripping the edge of the table as if grounding herself. I smiled. "Let's start with introductions, shall we?" Emily's lips parted, as if she was about to speak, But I cut her off effortlessly. "Jessica," I said, turning to her sister, "meet Brandon." Brandon, a well-dressed man in his early 40s, sat frozen in his seat. His neatly combed blonde hair and confident smirk had vanished the moment he realized he was not in control of this conversation. Jessica barely spared him a glance before rolling her eyes. "I already know him. What's the point of—" "Oh, you'll find out soon enough," I interrupted smoothly. My eyes flickered toward Emily. Her whole body had gone rigid. "Jessica," I continued, "did you know that your boyfriend has been seeing someone else?" A scoff. "Yeah, right." I chuckled, reaching into my pocket and tapping a few times on my phone. A second later, Jessica's phone buzzed loudly against the table. She hesitated. Then, with a scowl, she picked it up and swiped the screen open. Silence. Her fingers trembled slightly as she scrolled through the pictures. The color drained from her face. "What?" she whispered, her voice cracking. Her wide, disbelieving eyes snapped up to Brandon. "You've been with her?" Emily winced. Jessica shot up from her chair so fast that it scraped loudly against the wooden floor. "You've been with my sister?" Brandon raised his hands in defense. "Jessica, I—" Smack. Jessica's palm connected with his cheek in a loud, echoing slap. Elaine gasped. Richard muttered a curse under his breath. I, however, was grinning. "That's one." Emily's breath hitched. Her perfect mask was cracking. "Michael, stop this," she whispered. "You're being—" "Oh, sweetheart," I cut her off, tilting my head. "We're just getting started." My gaze shifted to Alex. A broad, muscular man, his usually cocky grin was completely wiped from his face. "Ryan," I said, turning to Emily's brother, "you remember Alex, don't you?" Ryan narrowed his eyes. "Yeah." His gaze flicked to Alex, suspicion creeping in. "What about him?" My smirk deepened. "He's been sleeping with Emily." Silence. Heavy, suffocating silence. Alex's entire body stiffened. Ryan's expression shifted from confusion to something much, much darker. "You're joking," he said, his voice eerily quiet. I reached into my pocket again, retrieving another set of damning evidence, screenshots, messages, timestamps. Jessica, still shaking from her own betrayal, glanced over. Her face paled even further. "You were messing around with both of them," she whispered, disgust twisting in her voice. Emily opened her mouth. "But I wasn't finished yet." "And Tom," I said, sighing dramatically, turning to the last man at the table. A well-dressed executive with an expensive watch and an air of self-importance. Tom swallowed hard. I smirked. "You've been quite the busy man." His Adam's apple bobbed as he swallowed again. "Not only did you get cozy with Emily," I continued, "but you did it right under your boss's nose." A sharp intake of breath from across the table. I turned to Richard, Emily's father. "Meet Tom, Dad," I said smoothly. "The guy sleeping with your daughter. Oh, and coincidentally, he also works for your company." Richard, who had been silent for most of the ordeal, finally spoke. His voice was low, simmering with barely restrained rage. "What?" I let the weight of that word settle over the room before answering. "Yes. Tom here has been taking business trips with Emily. On your company's dime." I leaned forward slightly, dropping my voice just enough for impact. "In fact, if you check your financial records, I'm pretty sure you'll find quite a few discrepancies." Richard's expression darkened. His fingers curled into tight fists. "You slimy little—" Emily's chair scraped against the floor as she stood abruptly, her breath coming in harsh gasps. "Stop it! Stop this right now!" Her voice cracked, frantic, desperate. I turned to her slowly, meeting her panicked gaze. "Why, Emily?" I asked, my voice dangerously soft. "Are you embarrassed?" Her hands clenched into fists. "You're making a fool of yourself." I exhaled a quiet laugh. Then I leaned in, lowering my voice so that only she could hear. "No, darling. I'm making a fool of you." The words sliced through her like a knife. Around us, the room was reeling. Jessica stormed out, her phone in hand, already calling someone, likely to ruin Brandon's life even further. Ryan stood so abruptly that his chair crashed to the ground. His gaze locked onto Alex, and the tension in the room spiked dangerously. Richard turned to Tom, pure fury written across his face, his fists clenching at his sides. And in the center of it all was Emily, breathing heavily, her world collapsing around her. I took a slow sip of my now lukewarm coffee, savoring the moment. The masks were finally off, and the chaos was just beginning. The room had transformed into a battlefield. Voices clashed in a cacophony of rage, shock, and betrayal. Arguments overlapped, accusations flew like daggers, and relationships unraveled right before my eyes. Jessica was still yelling at Brandon, her voice shrill with fury. Ryan had stepped dangerously close to Alex, fists clenched at his sides, his entire body radiating tension. Richard, Emily's father, looked like he was seconds away from lunging at Tom, his face dark with barely restrained rage. And in the middle of it all, Emily. She wasn't speaking. She wasn't moving. She was just watching. I could see the gears turning in her mind, trying, desperately, to find a way out. A way to regain control. But it was too late. She had lost. Still, I wasn't finished yet. "Are you done?" I asked, my voice cutting through the chaos like a blade. Silence. All heads turned toward me. I took a slow step forward, holding a small stack of documents in my hand. My fingers tapped rhythmically against the paper as I scanned the faces around the room, making sure everyone was paying attention. Emily straightened, trying to steel herself. "James, this is... No." My voice was calm, but firm. "Final." She fell silent. I exhaled slowly, taking my time. "Let's strip away the last layer of lies, shall we?" Then, with a flick of my wrist, I dropped the first document onto the table. Slap. The paper landed sharply against the polished wood. Emily's financial records. Her face went white. "I decided to take a deeper look into our finances," I said coolly, tapping the document. Imagine my surprise when I discovered nearly $60,000 had mysteriously vanished from our accounts over the past 2 years. I turned toward her, meeting her wide-eyed stare. Dinner dates. Hotel rooms. Jewelry. Even that little Paris trip you told me was a girls' getaway. I let the words settle. All paid for. With my money. A gasp from her mother. A look of horror from her father. "Mom, Dad, don't listen to him." Emily's voice cracked as she reached for the papers, as if she could make them disappear. But I wasn't done. I dropped the second document. "James, stop." I tilted my head, pretending to consider. Then, with the smallest smirk, I let the final document slip from my fingers. An envelope. Divorce papers. Emily froze. Her hands trembled as she stared at the papers in disbelief. "I've already signed," I said, my voice smooth, controlled. "It's done." Her throat worked as she struggled to swallow. "You." And since I had an excellent lawyer, I took a slow step forward. "Well, let's just say, you're walking away with nothing." A stunned silence fell over the room. "Your car." I took another step. "Mine." "The house." Another step. "Mine." "The money." I let out a small laugh. "Well, technically, it was never really yours to begin with, was it?" Emily's lips parted, but no words came out. I leaned in slightly, lowering my voice so only she could hear. "I let you believe you were in control." My tone was quiet, deliberate. "I let you think you were smart enough to play this game." A beat of silence. Then, I smiled. "The difference between us, Emily?" My voice dropped to a whisper. "I never play unless I know I've already won." And with that, I straightened, turning my back on her. Emily's entire world had just collapsed. Her family, disgusted. Her lovers, exposed. Fighting amongst themselves. Her career, ruined. Her future, non-existent. She had walked into breakfast thinking she was leaving me. But in reality, I had left her. And I had made sure she had nothing left to hold on to. Richard, Emily's father, was seething, his furious gaze locked onto Tom. "How long has this been going on?" he demanded, his fists clenched at his sides. Tom opened his mouth to respond, but before he could, Richard grabbed the stack of financial records from the table and hurled them in his direction, pages scattering like fallen leaves. "You've been stealing from me to fund your little affair with my daughter?" Tom flinched but said nothing. He knew better than to dig himself an even deeper hole. Through it all I watched. Calm. Unbothered. Satisfied. Emily still hadn't moved. She stood there, gripping the back of her chair, her breathing ragged. She had lost. But I wasn't sure if she had fully accepted it yet. Not until I turned away, stepping toward the front door. That was when she finally spoke. "James." I didn't stop. "James, please." This time, her voice cracked. I reached for my keys, the cold metal smooth in my hand. "Wait," she said, louder now, more desperate. "You can't just walk away." I exhaled slowly, tilting my head as I turned to look at her. She wasn't the composed, icy woman who had sat across from me at breakfast, casually announcing that she was leaving me. That woman was gone. In her place stood someone completely undone. Her flawless appearance had crumbled. Her usually sleek hair was messy, her lips parted as if she couldn't quite catch her breath. Her hands trembled. She looked small, helpless. Exactly the way I had felt when she first told me she was leaving. But the difference between us... I never beg. I let the silence stretch for a moment before I finally spoke. "Emily," I said, my tone almost amused. "Did you really think you could humiliate me, betray me, and walk away untouched?" She opened her mouth, but I wasn't finished. "I want you to remember this moment," I murmured, stepping closer, my voice dropping low. "Because it's the last time you'll ever have the chance to beg me for anything." A flicker of something crossed her face. Denial, anger, maybe even regret. But it was too late. Behind her, voices still rose in fury, the empire of deceit she had built collapsing brick by brick. And she couldn't stop it. She had spent years lying, manipulating, covering her tracks, and now she was completely exposed. Her world was ruined. And there was no way out. I turned away, stepping outside, inhaling the crisp morning air. The sun was still warm against my skin. The world hadn't stopped. Not for her. Not for me. Behind me, I could still hear the chaos inside the house. Glass shattering. More shouting. More betrayal unfolding in real time. But it wasn't my problem anymore. I walked down the steps, toward my car, my heartbeat steady. Emily had thought she was making an exit today. Instead, she had watched me walk away. And I hadn't looked back. I reached my car, the cold metal of the handle firm beneath my grip. The moment I pulled the door open, I heard it. Footsteps. Quick. Uneven. Desperate. I didn't need to turn around to know who it was. But I did. Emily stood there, barefoot on the cold concrete, her silk robe clutched tightly around her as if it could shield her from the wreckage of her own making. She looked nothing like the woman who had sat across from me that morning, sipping tea with calculated ease as she told me she was leaving. That woman had been in control. This woman... she was lost. "You planned this," she whispered, her voice barely carrying across the driveway. I didn't respond. "You set me up," she said, louder this time. "You turned everyone against me." I exhaled, feigning a moment of reflection, then met her eyes with a look so devoid of emotion it made her shiver. "No, Emily," I said quietly. "You did that all by yourself." She flinched as if I had struck her. For a brief moment, she just stood there, staring at me, as if waiting for me to take it back. To undo what had been done. But I wouldn't. I had no interest in saving her from this. She took a shaky step forward, gripping the edge of her robe like it could somehow turn back time. "James," she said, and I heard it, the cracks in her voice. The sheer desperation. She wasn't ready for this. She had never expected me to fight back, to be 3 steps ahead of her at every turn. And now, she had nowhere left to go. "Please," she whispered, voice raw. There it was. The moment she realized, for the first time in our entire relationship, that she held no power over me anymore. I didn't move. Didn't soften. Didn't blink. Instead, I laughed. A small, quiet sound. "You still don't get it, do you?" I murmured. Emily's lips parted, But no words came out. I leaned against the open car door, studying her. Did you really think you could humiliate me? Cheat on me? Take everything we built and walk away like you won? Her throat worked as she swallowed, struggling for a response. I let the silence settle. Then, with a slow shake of my head, I spoke the words that would haunt her. I already have. Her breath hitched. And then, without another glance, without another word, I slid into the driver's seat and shut the door. The engine roared to life beneath my fingertips. Through the windshield, I saw the reflection of the house in my rearview mirror. The place that had once been my home, now just a battlefield of shattered illusions. Inside, I could still hear the chaos unraveling. Jessica screaming at Brandon. Ryan ready to beat Alex into the ground. Richard's fury, still focused on Tom. And in the center of it all, Emily, standing in the driveway, watching. As I drove away. As I left her with nothing. As I left her to clean up the mess she had created. I turned the corner, the house fading into the distance, nothing more than a memory now. And for the first time in years, I felt free. Thank you for visited my YouTube channel. Your support, likes, and comments truly inspire me to create even more engaging content. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss an update. You're a part of this amazing community, and I'm thrilled to share my stories with you. See you in the next video on YouTube.